This is part 2 of CIS30A Week 3 lecture, which cover functions. So first we're going to talk about a function, what it is, and how to use the functions in the program. So functions allows you to organize, simplify, and modularize your code in that you can break the tasks up into smaller set of executable sequence. But in all programming language, you would start with defining a function, and in Python, we would start with defining the function and allow you to execute specific instruction under that function. So there are two types of functions. Number one is built-in or predefined. If you're working with built-in methods, that would be a built-in type of functions. Number two, you can create your own function or define your own function, or what we know it as the user-created functions. So in a function, we would have a group of related statements that perform specific tasks. For the majority of the times, we would use something like use a function to output a specific set of text in display, or in the next part when we cover file operations, we can write a function to output a receipt for a purchase for a business, or to summarize a certain type of input that the user has entered through our program. So the functions really allow us to break the program tasks into smaller chunks. And so in that sense, it allows us to easily fix the issue if there's issue with specific function. It allows us to organize and manage our program better. So the function in Python, we would start with the statement with def. And when you see this, that simply is the initial part of defining the function. Then we would follow it with the function name. And as any identifier, we want it to use unique name, and we cannot use keyword. And with the function, we would follow our function name with the parentheses. And inside the parentheses, we can add parameter, or we can leave it empty simply if we don't use any kind of parameter. So the keyword for defining a function is def. The next step is to give the function a name. And if you're using parameters such as arguments, you can pass values into the function. You can use variable in the arguments. Now a colon marks the end of the function header. Similar to C++, where you use a semicolon after you define your function, give it a name, and if you use any arguments, you would then follow and finish that up with a colon. And here it talks about documentation string to describe the function, what it does. That's optional. So here is an example using the format as we talked about. Now at the top, the first line here, we have a variable called name, and this variable is going to store the user input, and after they see that the prompt, we just enter your name. Next, we're going to define the function, and this function name is greet. The argument that we're going to use, we're going to bring down the variable name, and for the statement inside the function, we would have it output hello, bring down the name, good day. So if I put in Mary for name, when this function is called, it's going to say, hello, Mary, good day. So this is the body of the function or the statement within that function. This is what it's going to do. It's going to output hello, bring down the name, and then good day. And here is where we call the function. So unlike C++, you don't have to, there's no section for the main where you would call, but yes, when you call, you do enter into the main. So here, when we call, we simply bring down the name of the function and its argument. So that would complete the function definition and the function call. Another example here is absolute value. This example returned the value from the function. So we first define our function, and our function name is absolute value. And the argument that we're going to use, the parameter we use here is our num variable. If num is greater and equal to 0, it's going to return the number. Else, it will return negative number. Then we can simply call it inside the print method by doing print absolute value, which is our function name. And here we can give it a value 2. And then again, we would print, call the function again inside the print method, and we would give it a -4 value. So in this example, you see that we can actually return a value, and we can also we can call the function within the print method, which is here. So to illustrate this, I will show you how the program is written and also run in Tawny in the IDE. So as we talked about the first program has the greet function. So first it's going to prompt the user, it asks for the user to enter the name. So I will go ahead and put in my name. And then it's going to show me that the function is called here, hello, Casey, good day. And that is where we would call the function here. Okay. Then next, we have the absolute value function, and we would use the parameter num. And when we call it, we would use the 2 as the argument for that function. So we pass 2 here, and it's gonna print out the 2 as it is greater and equal to 0. When we use the -4, because it's not greater than or equal to 0, it's going to kick it over to else here, and it's going to return negative value, which is -4, negative num. So here you can actually put in a value in the parameter as argument for that function, or you can simply store that value into a variable and then bring down the variable as you call it. So in this one, we return the value from the function. Next, we have a function called calculate total sum. And with this, what we're doing is we're using an argument. And the way that we use the asterisk with the arguments here, That's just simply a placeholder. You can, what that will do is it actually create a place or a position for multiple arguments. So in the case here where we use a for loop, and multiple values, we're able to do that using the asterisk, and you can give it a name. So it doesn't have to be arguments. It could be just an identifier or name that needs to be here. So once we define the function, again, we put a colon, don't forget. Then we declare total sum, initialize it at 0. Then we have a for loop. And for this for loop, we're saying that for number in arguments, total sum is itself plus the number. So we're doing a running sum there. And when we call the function, we simply put in the value here, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so the output for this would be 15 as it adds up all of these values, because for our for loop, we are doing the running sum. So it's going to take 5 for the first round, add it with 4 for the second round, add it with 3 for the next round, add it with 2, and so forth. And also you notice in the definition for this function, we need to be indent after the colon, because all of this, including the for loop and the print, is part of that function. It's a body of that function. So we want to make sure that we indent there. And then when we call, we can tap it out, and then we can call here. And we can set the value for when we call the function. So for the next example, I have a function called display argument. And again, we're using the asterisk. So that allows us to be able to have multiple arguments. So that just create a placeholder for multiple arguments here. So in this one, we would use the for loop, and we would then add the items to our, and be able to display when we do the function call. So on the output for this, the first argument, it's going to say hello. The second argument, it's going to say for. And the last argument, it's going to say hi. So the main difference between this, the asterisk arguments, and the double asterisk is this is used for non-keyword arguments, and the double asterisk is used for keywords argument. So now you would use the asterisk with the arguments in the case where if you're not sure how many arguments you would be using in the parameter, then you would use the asterisk or the double asterisk. And the double asterisk is used for keyword arguments, and the single asterisk is used for non-keyword arguments. And so as you can see, when we did the function call for the last one, display the argument, we can specify argument 1 is hello, argument 2 is for, and argument 3 is hi. And that's going to give us the complete display compared to the previous where we're using the non-keyword argument single asterisk. It simply give us just whatever the value that's passed here, as we didn't specify the keywords inside the argument itself. So that's the true difference. That's what you see with the single and the double asterisk within the arguments parameter. So that kind of show you some of the differences in defining the functions, how the function is used and to return, and then also how it's called. So now, as part of the final in the quiz, you would see questions that would have functions, and you would need to be able to determine, the functionality of that functions. Also, your course project required that you define functions in your program, in your Python program. So make sure that you look it over, take a look at the example, and then we also going to have lab exercises that require functions. So I will touch a little bit on that. Now here is another example that is not in the notes. So this is a question to ask that requires the user to input their age, and then we need to check if the age is less than 65 or higher than 65. So in this, we start out with a variable called user age, and we need to parse it as an integer. So when we have an input method, inside that we would prompt for the user to enter the age. Then we would define our function, and for this program I decide to call it check age. And so when you decide to give a function a name, make sure that it makes sense to the program itself, so you can use a name, so that way when you troubleshoot you can go to specific function, as sometimes you would have a program that have lots of functions. And then for our parameter, we would use, for our argument, we would use the user age. Then we would implement a condition to check if the user age is less than 65. We then would print you are under 65, else we would print your age is 65 or higher. And lastly, we would then call the function and have the user age as the argument. So when we run this program, we would then see enter the age. So let's say I put 24, and 24, it checks true for this condition, so it shows me you are under 65. Let's run it again, and let's put 78, and so it checks false for this condition. Then it's going to go to else, and then it's printing the your age is 65 or higher. So as you can see, you can simply write a function just to check for user age. You can write a function to check for user name input, address, phone number. So we can break down the bigger tasks. Let's say that if you have to create a program for the user to register their information, then we can do that and have different functions to be able to check for the user information there. So this is one example that you can see how function would be used to check for the user age. Next, this is a program that is very close or the same as one of the lab exercise. So I have a program that's going to check if the number that the user input is odd or even. So first we have num. Num is going to store the user input and parse it as integer. As the user is prompted, enter a number. So here we use an input method. It prompts the user to enter a number. So I should put a colon there. And then next I have to find a function called fodd, and for my argument I'm going to bring down the variable, which is num. Then I'm going to check to see if it's odd or even by using a mod 2. So if num mod 2 is 0, if it's divisible by 2 and there's no remainder, we're going to go ahead and print the num is even. Else, if it's divisible by 2 and there's remainder, we are going to print it as odd. Then again, we simply call the function and then its argument, which is num. So when I run this program, it asks me to enter a number. So let's use a large number, 2359. And 2359 is an odd, as it is when it divides it by 2, we would have a remainder. So it's going to go to else and it's going to print odd. And then let's run this program again. We would check, let's say 442. It is divisible by 2 and then there's no remainder. So it's going to print that it is even. So as you can see, in this case, we create a function to check for odd or even number, and we simply use mod 2 to be able to apply the if and else condition for when we have 0 remainder, that will be even, and when we have no remainder, that will be an odd. And this concludes my example for functions, but you can proceed and look at the notes and the example that is provided. Now lastly, before I ended the video for this section, I wanted to talk about global and local variables. And as we get to class and class inheritance, this would become very important, because when you declare functions or member method of a class, and then also global variables compared to local variables of a class, members of the class, how they are accessible is very important. So local variables is utilized in such that if we wanted for the variable to operate in different parts of the program, in different functions, we wanted to have it global. If we are only using the variable for that particular function, that particular section of your script, where it's only accessible for that one function, then we can make it local. And the way Python is, it has two built-in methods, globals and locals. So in this example, it shows us that we can actually print out. So this allows you to determine whether the variable is either global or using the global namespace or local. And we have a variable here called var, and var stores 1, 2, 3 inside the function called fun. So now we can use locals, and then we can print our variables. Then we can also print local and globals. So to illustrate this, we will run the same program in our IDE here. So first, we have the first print here, which is locals, and we simply use the locals method to show which variable is local. And it shows me that var is local and var stores 1, 2, 3. And then the second print, we simply just confirm. So in this case, we would say what vars is, and then for the variables, what variables we have. So we simply have one variable, var1, 2, 3. So if you have multiple variables, it would list that here. And if you have a number of local variable, it would also include it in the last output. So in this case, our variable var stores 1, 2, 3. It is a local variable and it is part of the variable group. So it shows up with vars. Then when we use the globals, what it shows here is when we print out the globals, it shows the global namespace. It listed all of these. And where it's looking at the actual file under the method and inside that function at that location. So there's no additional information that we can receive from the globals except for that it would be these built-ins, namespace and information. So here what you can see is you can use locals, vars, and globals to be able to identify what are your variables, which ones are locals, which one are globals. So in the case where if you have a very lengthy program, you would be able to identify them using these built-in methods. And in the last part of this video, I also want to touch on how to write a switch in Python. As last semester, one of my students asked me, how would I write a program that would have a switch? So in C or C++, you would see a switch written like this, where it actually has a control statement for switch, and then you would have the case and the break. In Python, the implementation of the switch is a little different in that there is no switch. And in order to write a switch, we would implement functions, and then we would have the switch, the container, or a set or a dictionary that would be able to utilize the key with the value. So in this case, what we have is we would have various functions for each of the day of the week, and then we would have a default function. Then for the switcher, we implemented a dictionary, and for each of the key, we would have the value. Like 1 would be for Monday, 2 for Tuesday, 3 for Wednesday, 4 for Thursday, and so forth, and 7 for Sunday. Then to really operate by getting the value and key, the value based on the key from the dictionary, then we would have to have another function. In this case, we have a switch function. And then we would bring down day of the week, and we would do a get method here to obtain the value for the relevant key along with the default. So then we would call the switch function and then use the user choice as the argument. So here's the program that is shown in the notes. So the user choice, the user is prompted to enter 1 for Monday, 2 for Tuesday, and so forth, and 7 for Sunday. And as the user input, it's going to store that as an integer, parse it as an integer, and put it on the user choice. Then we have each of the definition for the function for each of the day. We have the dictionary, which is called switcher, it's each of the key from 1 through 7 is going to be relevant to Monday through Sunday. We have a switch function. We're going to return, and the value that's going to be obtained from the dictionary, and we're going to call the switch function with the user choice. So when we run this, let's say I put in 4, and that would say Thursday. If we run it again, if we put in 1, that should say Monday, and so forth. So as you can see, now let's say that we wanted to test the default. Let's say we put in 9, incorrect day. So the default also works. So this is an illustration on how you can implement a program that's comparable to switch in C. And this is a Python program that would be comparable with switch. And this concludes my video for functions, example of functions, and also a comparable switch program in Python. Please watch part 3 of week 3 lecture, which covers modules, as it would be very important for your project and also final exam.